Welcome to another episode of Lady Justice Talks, where curiosity meets law. Today you're with your hosts Chantel
and Charlie,
and we are going to be talking about a polarizing but interesting topic, which is decriminalizing sex work in Canada. And we have two beautiful guests here today from the WILA, or Women in Law Association. Please introduce yourselves.
So hi everybody, I'm Victoria and I'm the co-president of WILA.
Hi everybody, I'm Sanzala and I'm an executive events coordinator.
Hey, so we'll just jump right in. So what are the current laws on sex work in Canada, and what are the implications of the current laws for everyone involved in sex work?
Okay, so the current laws for sex work in Canada are a little complicated. So there are a number of factors. So first of all, selling sexual services, like prostitution, I guess you would call it, is legal. You are allowed to offer sexual services in exchange for compensation. That is allowed. But buying sexual services, purchasing sexual services is not legal. So if, somebody's allowed to, again, offer you sexual services in exchange for money, and that's legal, but you are not legally allowed to accept that. So it's obviously a little confusing. It's obviously a little complicated. That's done so that, I guess it's kind of like an image thing, so that, we in Canada can say, sex work is allowed, but buying it is not. So it kind of criminalizes the whole situation, really, because if you can't legally buy it, then, the people who are selling it are not legally, that can't legally be done. So it criminalizes the whole enterprise. Additionally, profiting off of someone's sex work, profiting off of someone's prostitution, if that's what you want to call it, is also illegal. So, for example, if you run, I don't know what the word is, I should have looked this up, but I don't know if there's a newer or different word for it, but like a brothel, if you run a place, a facility, an institution where people come and this is a place where you can come and seek out sexual services, that is not allowed because you are profiting off of other people giving sexual services. And then procurement of sexual services, so setting someone up with a sexual service, is also illegal. So most of it is illegal. Basically everything surrounding prostitution is illegal. You are allowed to sell sex work, but basically nobody's allowed to buy it, nobody's allowed to help you, none of that is allowed. So that is the system as it stands right now. And so sex workers, this makes it very dangerous for sex workers, because if they want to successfully sell, if they want to successfully sell their sexual services, they have to operate in the shadows most of the time, because the people that want to buy them don't want to risk getting caught because they would be criminally liable. And it just makes the whole thing very shady, I guess, and there's just a lot of risk associated with it because of how it's forced to operate due to the laws. Mm-hmm. I think that about covers it.
Yeah, and I think like what you said about the people who are buying these sexual services, it does make it a little bit more of a risky business and
yeah, absolutely
discourages sex work entirely. I'd like to know, what does decriminalizing sex work mean, and how does that affect Canadian legislation?
So decriminalizing sex work means removing any criminal penalties associated with selling sex work. But this still means that general rules applied as any other labor field. In Canadian legislation, we follow the Nordic model, which is Bill C-36, and that we don't allow people to purchase sexual services in an effort to minimize its clientele.
Amazing. Yeah. I love how you put that. So what is the difference between decriminalizing and legalizing sex work?
So decriminalizing and legalizing, or decriminalization and legalization, are terms that are often used interchangeably, but that's not actually the case. They are not the same thing. So decriminalizing, in the case of sex work, for example, would be removing criminality out of the equation, I suppose. So it would be treated, sex work would be treated like any other job, and you wouldn't be criminally responsible for seeking out sexual services. You wouldn't be criminally liable for offering sexual service. It would just take the whole criminality thing out of the equation. Legalizing sex work, let me go back to decriminalizing for a second. So decriminalizing is basically kind of like, we don't care. Like, do what you want to a certain extent, and we, the government, I guess, don't really care.
Okay. So is it like the government doesn't like regulate it?
Right. So the difference is legalization, specifically legalization, sex work would come with its own set of rules and regulations and whatever specific to it as a job. So it would, for example, hold on, I have some notes. Give me a second. So breaking the specific rules that would be set out. For example, people might have to, get licenses or register for things. If you want to run a facility where, women who want to, or men, where sex workers, want to work, you would need a license or a registration or like a whatever. It would all be very above board and regulated. And so then the only criminality that would come into the equation would potentially be like if you broke one of the regulations. So if you were running a facility without a license, or if you were doing this, that, or the other that directly contradicted the regulations. But the essence is there would be strict rules pertaining to sex work as a job specifically.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like that makes it more safe, not to that's kind of like showing our future questions, but I feel like that does make it more safe for both the sex workers and the clientele involved, because having regulations and actually having regulations is important so that they feel safe, right?
Yes. So I realized I didn't answer. Sorry, I'm going to cut you off because I realized I didn't answer the second part of the question, which was who would that benefit? And Chantel did just touch on that. So the sex workers would be benefited by decriminalization, ideally by legalization, but even by decriminalization, sex workers would be benefited because, like I previously mentioned, the way the system works right now, they need to do everything very secretly because their clientele are technically criminals by what they're doing. So they need to do any negotiations, anything like that. Everything needs to be done secretly. Nothing can be done publicly. Everything needs to be hidden. So if a sex worker wants to meet with a client in a public place to discuss terms of a deal or whatever, that can't currently be done really because of the legal ramifications of it. Whereas if sex were decriminalized, that would be allowed. We could, sex worker and their client could meet in public, things like that. Someone who wanted to run a facility where sex workers, work, they could have facility rules and regulations, contracts potentially. It would all be very above board and ideally, in a perfect world, a whole lot safer than the way the situation is right now, because people wouldn't need to fear criminal retribution as long as they were following the rules that were designed for everybody's health and safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love that response. I also feel like in the system right now, that would benefit so much with the relationship with police officers and just derivelating all of those stigmatisms toward them, and also giving them better access to better health and getting those sexual preventions and everything that they need in order for them to live safely as well.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of talk about the New Zealand model and how that has been effective for them. So can we touch base on what the New Zealand model is and how it has been effective?
Yeah, so the New Zealand model is also known as the Prostitution Reform Act of 2003, and that made New Zealand the world's first country to legalize sex work. And so basically in this module, both selling and purchasing this service is allowed. So the effectiveness of this model lies within the ability that it gives workers to report unsafe working condition, which in turn lowers risks of violence for them and HIV, and it allows them to seek justice if they've been harmed or if anything wrong has happened to them, whereas otherwise it would have been they would have had to been like, this is part of the job, this is what it is, I just have to keep my head down and just take it.
I absolutely love that, and I totally agree that right now in New Zealand, they've been very proactive in their approach towards people who are purchasing sexual favors and also working in the system. And to come to that, while we're talking about the decriminalizing aspect and legalization, so do you think that sex work should have labor laws around it, and how would that be beneficial to a sex worker in the system in Canada?
So yes, I think sex work absolutely should have labor laws around it. What it ultimately comes down to for me, because this is technically a question of opinion, so what it ultimately comes down to for me is sex work is most dangerous, and this is a broad point that doesn't address this question specifically, but sex work is not harmful to other people. It's often harmful, it often can be harmful to the sex worker. Sex work, for that reason, should not be criminalized, especially since there is a demand for this service. People may not want to talk about it, and I know this is something we're going to get into later about purity culture, but people may not want to talk about it, but a lot of people do seek out these services. And so given that there is the demand, not among a tiny fraction of the population, but many people, there is demand for this, there should be labor laws surrounding it. Labor laws exist, in theory anyway, to protect workers. And this is a job that can be very risky, where workers need protection, where workers' lives are threatened, where workers can be put in, hostile situations. This can be a very, very dangerous profession. And so labor laws would be extremely beneficial. Again, it would be part of the whole putting things above board and making everything just, honest and transparent. And it would just absolutely be beneficial. It would make it a safer experience for everyone, I think.
Mm-hmm. I love that, especially because I feel like with sex work, when you have labor laws around that, they can get adequate breaks during their shifts, and they're able to have access to materials that actually benefit them, such as maybe condoms that are safe for allergies, different things like that. And also, they're not being able to take who's employing them, they won't be able to take advantage of them, because I think that normally happens in the system quite often, and to horrible thing to happen to them.
Yeah, hold on. I'll say one more thing. I'm aware that this is a TV show, by the way. But on CSI, on Crime Scene Investigation, which is a TV show I used to watch, there was a recurring character showed up in a couple episodes.
I love CSI.
And her name was Lady Heather, and she was what's it called, a madam or whatever.
Yeah,
she ran.
Yeah, she was.
Yeah. So she ran again, God, I don't know if this is the word to use anymore, but a brothel, basically. So she, in her employ, because in Las Vegas this is all allowed, I believe, she in her employ had, X number of sex workers, and they worked out of basically a house, and she was in charge, and, there were a number of crimes that occurred, and that was why we met her or whatever, but the rules were very... she was very keen on protecting her girls, on protecting the people that worked for her. She was, again, I know this is a TV show, I know this is a thing of fiction, but I think that's the kind of thing we shouldn't aspire to, where she was very, if a client was ever disrespectful or harmful or anything to one of my girls, they would not be coming back, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. There were just all kinds of, she was very pro-regulation, pro-protection, everything like that, and I think that is exactly the kind of thing we should aspire to. I think that's the kind of thing that decriminalization, legalization potentially, and labor laws would make steps towards doing, even if it wasn't easy, even if it wasn't quick. I think that would be the ultimate goal, and I think that would be a very good thing to aspire to.
Yeah. I love that. I also feel like that, the labor laws can protect the girls whose employers don't have their best interests at heart, such as the madam that we were just talking about. She wanted to protect her girls. I feel like having those laws in place will still protect the girls who don't have someone like that in their lives.
And I feel like all of this regulation would help like settle disputes because there's no regulation right now. I'm sure there's a lot of disputes regarding salary, how money is distributed, and especially when it comes to, like I said, I don't know, like she said, I don't know the correct term for it right now, but like people who are in charge of brothels who don't have the best interests and only want to exploit their workers, it does help with that. Talking about policing and like the decriminalization of sex work, how does policing sex work cause more harm than good?
So yeah, policing sex work actually does cause more harm than good, because when you look at how some enforcement officers just engage in letter of the law, it's very strict, it's very almost blind. They don't really take into account context and or fairness. They just kind of, administer the law as it is. And then we can look into who does this disproportionately affect, which is marginalized women, poverty-stricken women, women of color, indigenous women that, have to turn to this as means of providing for themselves. This also just takes away from the broader systemic issues at hand and just enforces street policing rather than focusing on housing inequality, intersectionality issues, as well as, lack of job opportunities.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like sometimes too, especially, I think that police, especially here in Toronto, where the nightlife and just everything like that is bumping on the streets and everything, sometimes police just need to, I know when we're looking at Lady Justice and everything like that, I think that sometimes police do tend to go very much letter of the law, and I think that sometimes they do need to lift the blindfold a little bit and just kind of look at the situation that they're in. And going towards that, so how do you think that society's attitudes would shift if there was a decriminalization?
So I think I don't think we can take all of society together, because I think even right now, I'm sure there are people that view things differently.
100%.
And I think that would stay the same even if sex work was decriminalized or legalized or whatever. So this is where we're going to bring purity culture in, and I can speak to this because I am a Catholic person. I am a person that has grown up going to church, and I personally am not a conservative, politically speaking. I would identify certainly more as a liberal, as a progressive. But I know, especially through church, where I've spent so much time, a lot of people that are very, very conservative and very, very old school in the way they view things. There are people that are like that in my family. And so I know how strongly certain people feel about this profession. I'll call it a profession. They, I'm sure, would not. Being, shameful and disgusting and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I don't see those opinions. I don't see those the people who feel that way right now, I don't see their opinions changing if sex work were to be legalized or decriminalized. I think that's going to stay more or less the same. Similarly, I think there are people who right now, and I would be one of them, despite the fact that sex work at the moment is criminalized, I don't feel that it should be, which I think I've made pretty clear here, and I would welcome a decriminalizing shift. So honestly, I don't know that decriminalizing sex work will change people's opinions a whole lot, because I think people are really set on where they stand on this issue, and I think it would take a lot, and I think a lot of people aren't going to move on it at all. There are things that, were previously criminalized and are now decriminalized, marijuana, for example. And I'm sure, I know people personally that are like, again, they thought it was criminal before, it was criminal before, it's no longer criminal, but they don't feel differently about it, despite the fact that the law views it differently now. So I think that's a big problem, And the other thing is, and again, I can speak to this because I grew up in church, sex is it's a very taboo topic.
Yeah, 100%.
for a lot of people, right? Not for everyone. Like, I know there are groups of friends and there are groups of people who will like openly discuss this with each other, and that's amazing. But I also know, again, from personal experience, that there are a lot of people who will never be okay discussing this. Like, this is not something we're talking about. This is not something we're mentioning. This is not something we're going to acknowledge exists at all. And we're just like, it's very taboo. And again, for those people, I don't think it's going to become less taboo, even if it becomes legalized.
Yeah, because if you grow up with that ideology, you're kind of set in your ways, and it's hard to get out of that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 100%. I also feel that I love how you brought up the marijuana and the legalization with that, because I even find walking down the street myself in Toronto or just at home, there's the people who are smoking it in public, and you have people who walk by and go, you know, I like that stinks, get it out of here.
Yeah,
I
when
hate
they're
this.
like, oh, that stinks. Like,
And yeah, I love how you brought up just even though the law changes, and the law changes so frequently, just depending on our views in society and just how we change, and they change so often that even though they change, those views may stay the same. So I just love how you brought that up.
yeah, and I think it's important to note that sex work is predominantly, not to say that like women dominate the field, but it's definitely women supply the most in sex work. So purity culture has such a big impact on our perception on sex work, because we already have this culture, especially in America or in North America, with about purity culture, because we grew up in a.
I'm taking over for her.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
A lot of people, and okay, for the record, I can only speak as a Catholic person, as a Christian person, because that is what I am. I am not a person of any other religion, but I do believe, based on my understanding, that in other religions, in many other religions, the same kind of thing applies. Like, I think this is also, I don't think this is only a taboo topic
it's definitely a
in
universal,
Catholic Church.
Yeah, it's definitely
Right?
like a universal experience for most religions. And I also love just seeing like the different perspectives in religion, just because I myself, I didn't grow up with a religion. Just that was just something that my household never did. And my parents were always said like, people have different opinions. This is all different cultures and everything like that. So I never had a problem with it growing up. My parents would always say, you have to look at everyone's different perspectives and what they're going through. So I just love to see how, even though you're raised in a predominantly Christian household, you do have this view because you've had that education from it as well. So I love to see that too.
I feel like purity culture is definitely a reflection of the patriarchy, not necessarily like religion.
100%.
I was supposed to say. Yes. I also grew up in a Christian household, so definitely sex work is something that I like had to educate myself on, and I think that's something that we should all be educating ourselves on, rather than just accepting things at face value. Just to talk about decriminalization again, how can decriminalization improve the health and safety of workers and clientele?
So decriminalization of sex work can absolutely help the overall health that sex workers are receiving. For one, just in general, just removing the stigma from around it just encourages people to seek health care when they need it most, and not in fear of shaming or yeah.
I love that, because I also feel that during sex work, it's such a scary topic to talk about with a client. You want to protect yourself, but the client doesn't want to inframe themselves, or, maybe they have something going on at home. They don't want to be unfaithful to their partners or whoever their situation is with. So HIV and sexual diseases, it's a real thing, and I think that it's so scary to have it once you're not allowed to carry protections for yourself. And I think that also just the decriminalizing, as you said, can really help in their health and their safety. And going off of that, how do you think that decriminalization can provide more stability in their lives?
I think that decriminalization provides more stability in the lives of sex workers through so many different aspects. Like, I know we talked about healthcare, that they can just go and seek healthcare without fear of being shamed. Also, now that it's recognized as a field of labor, they can, open a bank account and file their taxes, and then that just helps them apply for more social assistance like housing and welfare, and that just increases their overall stability. And then also, just back to reducing stigma, they can actually foster community engagement with one another, and just maybe create support groups, because they've probably been through similar things together, being in the same workforce. So yeah.
I love that. That's so good.
Thank you so much. Do you have any other questions to ask?
I was going to say I have. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I was
She's
gonna
ready,
say-
she's ready.
I'm really far from the mic. I was going to say I have just one other thing, and I don't know that this fit into an answer to a specific question, but I just want to kind of summarize, I guess, I think what both Sanzala and I have covered, which is that, and okay, this is my personal opinion. I did not go over this with her, but like, I think this is a pretty fair summary of, you know, what we've said, which is that sex work should not be harmful to a client, and the risks of it being harmful to a client at the moment, for example, HIV, AIDS, sexually transmitted diseases, you know, things like that, those harms exist, I think, primarily because of how secretive and how, you know, undercover this whole enterprise has to be right now because of the laws surrounding it. If it was decriminalized or even legalized, I think everybody would be safer, everybody would be better off. And I don't think that we, members of society, are in any position to judge sex workers. I think a lot of people, and again, this goes back to, you know, things that I've heard in church or from, you know, very conservative people I know and whatever. Oh, you know, get an education, get a job, then you're not going to have to be a sex worker, da-da-da-da-da. Okay, but like, can we be very serious for a second? Because in this economy, are you kidding me? There are people with with post-secondary, like with graduate educations, with degrees, with whatever, that don't have jobs, that are getting fired. Education is not guaranteeing you a paycheck in this day and age. And some people have kids to feed. They have, you know, they may be the only source of income in a family. They, you know, whatever the situation may be. And so given that, the only really harmful things that I can see about sex work right now stem from the fact that it is being criminalized. I think decriminalizing it is absolutely the way to go. I don't think any of us are in any position to judge, and I think this is just, you know, it may not be something a lot of us want to talk about. It may not be something, you know, that we consider polite conversation or, you know, typical conversation, easy conversation, but this is a job. People do this because they need to. You know, I'm not saying everybody hates it, but I think a lot of people do this because they need to. A lot of people do this to stay off the streets, and we are in no position to be making that harder for them, given that the thing that's making it the worst for everybody, the thing that's making it dangerous, that's making it unsafe, is the laws that currently restrict it.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I think that too, when we're talking about conservative views and the thoughts, and I feel like the reason that we talk about it so much in this day and age is to just take away that taboo conversation about it, because sex work is something that needs to be talked about and recognized as a legitimate profession, and as well as I think that our views are predominantly shaped from the Catholic Church and religion as well. So just stepping away from it and seeing the realities that it's caused is definitely something that the world and society should be really talking about. And I just love how you put everything.
I tried, guys.
Thank you so much for your responses. Did you guys have any other last notes that you wanted to bring up? Any last questions? No?
I don't think so.
All right,
Amazing.
thank you so much for being here, guys. I really appreciate your time. Thank you also, our audience, for tuning in. Please stay tuned for future episodes. Bye!